What's up, guys? It's Wednesday, March 18th, another day from paradise and self quarantine. This week on the podcast, Thomas Cox, CGO at StrongBlock, joins me to discuss governance in blockchain. Governance is very important for maintaining more effective blockchain systems, and it's something that we don't usually talk about as much in the space, but is definitely a very important aspect, and it is an interesting topic that I think you guys will also find interesting. So if you guys like this episode, feel free to make a contribution to keep the podcast ad-free by going down into the description below for the episode and clicking on the link. And if you have not already, be sure to subscribe and share this episode with somebody that you think would like to learn more about StrongBlock, blockchain governance, or just blockchain in general. Enjoy.
This is the BlockHash Podcast.
All right, Thomas, how you doing?
Excellent. How are you?
Very good, very good. So before we jump in and kind of get started talking about all these wonderful things with blockchain governance and the things that you guys are doing at P2145, tell me a little bit about your backgrounds in blockchain and how you kind of got to where you are now, so the audience can be a little bit more familiar with who you are.
Right. So I'm Thomas Cox. I'm currently Chief Governance Officer at StrongBlock.io. And I started my technology career back in the late 80s, early 90s, working at Oracle Corporation. And I also worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers, IBM, a few other places, and did, big enterprise scale database stuff. Database architect was probably the role I remember most fondly, where I think I did the most interesting work. And then I shifted into studying leadership and teamwork, and because I'd noticed, as we all do, I'm sure, some teams work better than others, and I couldn't see how to make my teams that weren't working well work better, and that's so frustrating. And you don't want to bail on a cool project because the team's struggling, but how do you fix it? And so that became my fascination for about 15 years. And then I got a call one day that Block One was ramping up very rapidly. They had less than a year to finish their software because the token sale was going to end June 1st of 2018. And here it was August of 2017. And we needed to get the existing team augmented and moving forward rapidly. So I got on board at Block One at the beginning of the early days of, I should say, of their ICO, which of course famously turned into a $4 billion ICO. Mm-hmm. And my background, I understood the database concepts. Took me a while to get up to speed of the blockchain stuff. But I understood distributed databases a little bit. And of course I was delighted and fascinated, and it helps that I'm a libertarian. So I got the ethos right away. I'm like, yeah, this is great. Yeah. Decentralized, baby. And so that was a great crash course for me. I got to meet the folks in the EOS community and get to know the EOS.io software really well, which, as it turns out, is actually a really good enterprise piece of software. I can explain that in a minute. And then once we launched the mainnet, we kind of done what we were going to do, and I started looking for my next thing. And four of us who had been in early at Block One, and none of whom wanted to move to Blacksburg because that was one of the things you had to do back then. We said, well, we really like this software. Let's take it to the enterprise. And so we started StrongBlock to take EOS.io and other technologies as they prove themselves into an enterprise context. And the whole time I was doing this, I was focused on governance. That was my niche. And it came about, why that became my niche is I was not technical enough to be all that helpful on the technical side because blockchain is so demanding.
Right.
You got to know cryptography. You've got to know peer-to-peer networking. If you're a fairly low-level coder and understand some of that deep stuff, you can be really helpful. I didn't. And I knew something about database design, and I helped as I could on, making that clear internally with internal documentation, but there's a limit to that. And then I realized that we had pretty strong promises in the white paper around how this chain was going to operate in terms of decision making amongst the stakeholders. Once you bought a token, they gave you certain rights to, participate in choosing block producers and by implication in setting policy. And so we had some really interesting conversations with a guy named Ian Grigg. Ian Grigg is the inventor of the Ricardian contract. He's been working on electronic cash since before Bitcoin. He worked on e-gold and some other things. He's he is very well connected and extremely brilliant. And he wrote a very influential paper for us called The Governed Blockchain, which was my deep dive into how could you approach a public mainnet in a way other than the way Bitcoin and Ethereum were doing it, which were the two primary use cases at the time. And we've all seen that Bitcoin and Ethereum, if you want to get a decision made, it can be really hard. The Bitcoin folks fight like cats and dogs for months, if not years, over something simple like SegWit or block size. And they chain split. That's one of the ways you can quote govern unquote is by agreeing to disagree and turning one group into two groups. Which, if you're the dominant player like Bitcoin is, it's not too harmful. But if you're a much smaller project, say, splitting your small project in two doesn't increase your reach, and it also means you're not figuring out how to get to the simplicity on the far side of complexity that you could get to if you could merge the different competing ideas into some higher vision, which if you had a commitment to stick together, you might be able to do. And toxic disagreement occurs in part because people don't have a clear path forward on how to legitimately agree and make decisions and be bound by them. And that's why you see projects like Decred and Tezos and the original V1 EOS Constitution tried to do this and failed. But also all of the commercial projects like MetaLedger from Chronicled have very clear, they've learned. And so they make it clear up front, hey, here's how we're going to make decisions on stuff that we don't yet realize we have to make a decision on. Right? It's in the DAO hack being a perfect example of, oh, oops, we weren't expecting this. And if you don't have for your project, whatever size project you are, I say, I will quote or echo the guidance of a great many other people in saying, you must have a governance plan in place early, very early. It can be simple. You could, morph over time. A lot of them do. But if you don't have a clear process in place that people agree to as they enter, that, hey, when we have a disagreement, we're going to, stand in a circle and talk until we all agree, or we're going to have a 3/5 vote. Voting is a bad idea, by the way, or at least for smaller projects, or we're going to blah, blah, blah. I mean, you've got to have a method that people are familiar with quickly, so that when suddenly there's this unexpected problem, you can fall back on the thing we all agreed to back before I knew which side of the argument I was going to be on. Because once I know which side of the argument I'm on, suddenly any attempt to change the rules, I'm going to treat that with great suspicion. It's like, well, wait, why are you guys changing the rules on me? It must be to advantage yourself. And so once there's a dispute on the table, if you go dispute first, governance second, it's going to get ugly. Almost always. And there's rare exceptions. And what we're getting into here is the challenge that all governance faces is legitimacy. And legitimacy is, I'm going to see if I can throw out a large word here. It's an intersubjective phenomenon. And when I say intersubjective, here's what I'm talking about. You and I might sit across each other and there's a salt shaker on the table between us and we can both objectively see that it's there. If we look away, look back, it's still there. If we don't believe it's there, it's still there. And if the subjective thing is, well, my opinion of it, is it a pretty salt shaker? You and I might have very different opinions of what's attractive in the world. Totally subjective. You can't argue that my aesthetics are wrong. They're just different. There's no arguing matters of taste, someone famously said. But then there's a third category. It's things that are subjective yet shared, and two great examples are the English language and the value of fiat currency, right? If we all decide not to use a word anymore, we decide to start using a word. Okay, it's a word, right? MEH, meh. I don't think that word existed 100 years ago. It does now. It has meaning. That came up emergently from the grassroots. English is a decentralized language, and it evolves and changes as people use it. Money, it has value largely because we all agree it does. Fiat currency is sort of annoying that way. It's especially annoying when central banks can just go make some more on their own without permission, and somehow we're all supposed to agree to that. And so blockchains have the same, governance has the same attribute, that if you believe it's legitimate, it is. And if enough people stop believing in it, it stops being legitimate. Just as if we all stopped believing in the dollar, it would cease to be valuable.
Absolutely.
And this is a collective and emergent phenomenon. And I would claim that most libertarians are ill-suited temperamentally to even understand, let alone deal with, the challenges of managing a collective of people with shared interests but diverging viewpoints, which is kind of every blockchain ever.
Right. And on the subject of subjectivity, that really is like the fundamental driver in pretty much all markets, in crypto and blockchain and Bitcoin and whatnot. The fundamental thing that, binds it all is governance. And I think that's the thing that, in this space that we've seen so many issues with, so many problems around. And I don't think we talk about it quite enough and educate ourselves on it quite enough. I definitely have not had a lot of people on the podcast talking about governance as well. We've definitely talked a lot about subjectivity and markets and a lot of technical things, but
right,
not on the governance side of it. So this conversation is very interesting.
Just to raise the stakes a little bit. So I was at the Blockchain in Transport Alliance meeting in Atlanta a year and a half, almost 2 years ago.
Right.
And we're listening to this guy from IBM give a great talk about their market research they've done and where they saw the spending coming. And it was really good. And at the end of it, this guy, Stephen Rogers, he's the VP of for blockchain in supply chain for IBM. Mm-hmm. A fairly high ranking guy. He's aware of the internal work and the internal projects. And he says, the biggest thing that stops proof of concept projects from scaling up to production is governance problems. And he went on to mention Maersk as a case of governance failure, that they had, done all this work with IBM, his company, that Maersk is the big international shipping giant. Right. They'd created this thing called Trade Lens, LENS. And it had, come online, well over a year earlier from this conversation. And they'd got a bunch of customers to start using it, but they had not managed in over a year to sign up a single trade partner to use the chain. It's like, what's the point of a blockchain if you don't have multiple people writing to it? That's strange. And it turns out Maersk had been insisting that all of the trust nodes, as they're called on Hyperledger Fabric, basically the consensus makers, the validators, the block producers, the miners, if you will, that all of those would be controlled by Maersk. And so you could come, Mr. Competitor / trade partner, and you could run your business on my chain where I decide what the truth is. How's that sound? And apparently it didn't sound very compelling because no one took them up on it for well over a year. And like a few weeks before this conference, they finally figured out, oh, hey, what if we let them run their own trust nodes and then they can participate in consensus, and then they're not going to worry about Maersk creating its own truth because Maersk controls 100% of the nodes. And sure enough, as soon as they made that decision, they signed up 40 partners. So, hello.
Right.
And it illustrates to me the incredible importance of not just seeing what do people have at stake in terms of the transactions. Oh, I'm going to track this shipment. I'm going to, indicate here's where I took custody and here's where I handed custody off to somebody else. Or, here's which raw materials went into which finished goods in case there's a recall. That's all great. But you have to say, how do we, when we all come together to write to the same blockchain in order to share data and reduce friction between us, how do we manage that chain? Which bugs do we fix first? When shall we roll out bug fixes? What if somebody says, hey, we should expand trade lanes to not just do ocean shipping, but we want to do like land carriers too, and it's going to need to change and add more traffic on the chain. It's going to change some of the data structures, and everyone's going to have to take a hit over on the IT side. And let's do it today. And you might think, I don't have budget for that, and I'm an ocean carrier. Why should I take extra time to incur costs to support people who aren't me? And if you don't have a path to decide those things, again, those are all political questions, right? They're not technical questions. They're really political questions, and you don't have a smart contract sitting out there with all the questions preloaded that people can go and quote unquote vote on.
Right.
And even if you did, you might not like your results. I mean, the DAO had voting. The DAO could have saved itself. Remember the DAO hack, right?
Yep.
At the height of it, when somebody was quote unquote stealing / utilizing a feature of the code and siphoning ether out, they couldn't get even like 15% of token holders to even show up to cast votes on it. I mean, your money's being stolen and the bank is telling you, hey, we need you to come to the bank and help us stop the money being stolen. Arguable. And like only 15% of people show up. How wacky is that? So low turnout is an ongoing challenge with governance. The fact that the folks who ran the DAO and said multiple times they had just nailed the flag to the mast over, it's code is law and whatever happens, that's what's meant to happen. And there are no bugs, right? Like the very concept of a bug has been defined out of existence. If the code does it, then it's supposed to. And then someone starts siphoning money out with a reentrance loop bug. It's like, okay, then I guess it's okay that they're doing that because you just said code is law and whatever the code does is correct. And now the code's doing that. Yeah, you.
Yeah. The funny thing about the DAO that it's always kind of made me laugh is it's this first decentralized organization of folks, of people that are supposed to be able to come to consensus yet be decentralized at the same time. Yet this DAO hack happens and no one can come to consensus on what to do about it.
until Vitalik weighs in and says,
Exactly.
let's do this. And then everyone follows like lemmings. And what that tells you is that legitimacy is always a human phenomenon, and humans accept legitimacy from a limited number of sources. One of which is old institutions. If it existed before I was born, then it's legitimate. And if you're trying to create it when I'm in my 50s, it's probably not legitimate by default. Another is charismatic leaders, right? Key individuals who are well regarded. Vitalik is sort of a giant in the Ethereum community. And so if he says something, a lot of people are very inclined to be swayed by that. Now, you could say good or bad, but I'm just telling you, that's where legitimacy comes from. Old institutions, long-standing traditions, written constitutions, things that are reinforced through communal activity, charismatic leaders, and so forth. And that's really kind of all you got to work with. So hence my strong advice to people who have these projects that please think about how you would like the community to respond in the event something comes up that you just didn't anticipate and you're in a gray area, and you've got to make some fairly important decision that pretty much everybody has to pretty much agree with. So let me illustrate that with an analogy. Let's say that we live in a village, you and I, and there's 150 people, and 50 live on one hill, 50 live on the next hill, and 50 live in the sort of lowlands in between. And we're on the coast, little fishing village. And all the fishing villages are routinely attacked by pirates. Let's say it's the 1700s. So we've got gunpowder, we have piracy, we don't have a strong central government to protect us, haha. And we come to the realization, let's say all 150 people agree that, if we could just fortify one of these two hills, build a little fort, buy some cannon, that the pirates would leave us alone. Let's say that is 100% true. The only choice in front of us is which hill. We got two, we got to pick one. And I'm over on my hill saying, not my hill. And you're over on your hill saying, well, not my hill. And we're saying, well, we haven't got a third hill, so it's going to be one of us. And if we don't act, guess what? There's no fortification. The next pirate attack is successful. There's looting, murdering, pillage. We all lose. And so the formula for governance is, it's hard to get to unanimity, but it's hard or dangerous to never agree at all. That's what governance is. You're in that space where, on the one hand, because if you get to the unanimity, then there's no issue. And if not deciding doesn't really hurt anybody or doesn't really matter, still no issue. But when you've got a crucial decision to make, Dow hack, and you can't easily achieve enough unanimity to move forward, you're in governance space. And governance is defined as collective decision-making. That is, decisions in the context of a collective entity. And a collective is also defined as, we've all got something that we share, some shared resource, some shared community, some shared, chain, village, whatever, where even if I don't vote in favor of the thing, if the thing still happens, I can't opt out, right? If 149 people all say, yeah, Thomas, the hill that you're living on, that's the one we're fortifying, I can't just opt out of it and say, well, I'm not moving, because you can't simultaneously fortify the hill and not move me off of it. It's just not possible. So the ability to just opt out isn't there. Unlike, hey, let's start up a new TV channel, and I'll say, I'm not going to watch it. I can opt out easily. So this is the challenge that all blockchains will always face, because all blockchains create collectives, and all collectives have collective choice issues. So what then is the path forward? And the first step is admitting you've got a problem. Tell me if this sounds familiar. Once you admit you've got a problem, right? Oh yeah, there will be these gray areas. There will be these unknowns ahead of us. We do need a legitimate method for stating the problem and coming to an agreement on the solution, and overseeing the execution of that solution, and tweaking the decision-making rules as we go. Now, I got a lot of comfort as I was exploring this by reading a lovely book by, it's called Governing the Commons. It's by a Nobel Prize winner, Elinor Ostrom. And she wrote a number of important works on how small agricultural collectives, in many cases, sometimes very big ones, managed, despite being, not super educated. None of them knew anything about cryptography, but they were able to take a what's called a common pool resource and manage it for, in her study, she profiled over a dozen. The shortest lived one was over 100 years of continuous successful management, and the longest lived one was over 1,000 years. Can you imagine that? 1,000 years of a group of humans doing what the theoreticians say can't be done, which is govern a commons, because the tragedy of the commons can't be done, must privatize it. No, we must have government ownership. And this was neither. And she found repeating patterns of institutions and behaviors that allowed people to successfully manage and govern their common pool resources. And I read that very ravenously and took it very much to heart. And it's not the be all end all, because she was looking at a very specific set of circumstances, and ours are a little different. But there's a lot of wisdom in there. And so if my first advice to people is to say, hey, governance really is important on your project. If you don't have it figured out, do so, even if it's a single page document, memorandum of understanding. We, the undersigned, as we join this project, agree that we will, whatever your decision making is going to be. And if we want to change this, we will, change it with a 2/3 or 3/4 or whatever majority. And you have to say who's in and who's out. You've got to have some way of determining who's in this community and is allowed to vote on how we manage our fishing area,
Right.
and who isn't. And by the way, you got to be able to prevent the international trawlers from coming into your waters and just stealing all the fish. So you've got to have clear boundaries. And something like Bitcoin, it manages itself beautifully, in part by being so incredibly minimalistic. But if you think you're going to replicate the success of Bitcoin with your governance by just not having any, and we'll just all yell at each other until we come up with an answer, you're going to evolve very, very slowly, which might be fine. I think for Bitcoin, that's a feature, actually. And you're going to have a really hard time attracting new people into your space if it's any kind of a business consortium or any kind of a business-oriented blockchain, which I think all the important ones are going to be here for the next few years. Because stakeholders are going to say, I'm going to take the time and effort to come and put my scarce resources into your blockchain project, and you don't have any way for us to resolve disputes. You don't have anything written down. You haven't got any gray area management process, AKA governance. And if your answer is no, we don't, then I'd advise that person to not join your project, because that's chaos. It's chaos in the making.
Absolutely.
So, and because obviously I'm pretty interested in this topic, and I'm apparently one of the few people who has done as deep a dive as I've done and had quite as much experience as I had. I was, in some ways, might call me the chief architect of the EOS version 1 governance, which failed. And it failed in a really interesting way. And
Why
I
did it
learned a
fail?
lot from that. It failed because we didn't have an onboarding process where we said, hey, if you're buying tokens, then you're agreeing to the following rules. And we didn't have, for a variety of legal issues, the mainnet did not have Dan Larimer playing the role of Vitalik saying, hey guys, we all need to coalesce around X. By the time Ethereum had governance issues, they had been running for several years.
Right.
EOS mainnet was going to have governance from day one. And Block 1, in order to avoid certain kinds of legal liability, absolutely could not be, not only could they not, govern that chain, they couldn't be seen influencing the governance of the chain at all. And that's one of the reasons Block 1 has kept at such a distance from the EOS mainnet.
Do you think that's what gives Ethereum such an advantage over EOS at the moment? Like just having that background, having Vitalik being
I would question the extent to which they even do have an advantage. When I look at it technically, remember, I'm coming at it from this enterprise background and the utility of the software. And, mainnets to one side, the EOSIO software is so much more advanced than Ethereum. If you look at the Ethereum roadmap, Ethereum 2.0 is basically what EOSIO was a year ago. And they're hoping to become that in 2 years. So I look at that, I think, gosh, if anybody looked at those two pieces of software on their merits, nobody would build on Ethereum.
Oh yeah. Well, from a technical standpoint, I don't think Ethereum is at any advantage compared to what's out there right now and being developed. But from a social advantage,
it's version 2 versus it's third generation versus second generation blockchain. Of course you expect things to advance, and they're trying to advance themselves. In terms of working on mainnets, I question the utility of what's happening on mainnets. What is the main thing that's been created on Ethereum? And the answer is ICOs. Oh my gosh, wonderful! We've solved the world ICO shortage. Huzzah! It's like, what did that do for us exactly? And I'm just not seeing it.
Right.
I'm just not seeing it. Because again, I'm looking at how do we use this technology to improve the human condition? And the answer, I believe, is to solve problems. And if you've got a project that you want to bring to the world, the product of that project cannot be a token. It has to be solving a problem, like Maersk, right? Or any of its
Right.
competitors, or the food trust network that Walmart brought into existence. Walmart
Mhm.
created a food trust, and now every single leafy green vegetable that you buy at any Walmart in the United States is tracked on a blockchain. And their governance has been very top down because they're a monopsony buyer, right? They're not a monopoly seller; they're a monopsony buyer. They're such a huge buyer that they can just say, "Look, if you don't have to use a blockchain, but if you don't, you're not selling to us." And if you're a smaller, even a large farmer trying to raise crops and sell them to buyers, you're going to go, I'll use whatever you want to use. Just like Maersk was able to get all their customers on very quickly. And Walmart is starting to extend Walmart is starting to expand the food trust network both beyond leafy greens internally and also beyond Walmart. They're trying to bring on other uh, retailers, which I think is going to be a great public good.
What would
And they're
separate Walmart from doing that versus Maersk from doing that? Is because Maersk,
uh,
they took a very centralized approach, obviously, and that kind of hurt them. But if
Yeah, and
Walmart,
so has Walmart, but I'm of the belief or the opinion that Walmart is probably, I don't have any inside line here. I suspect
right,
that they're not going to try to like maintain control and be uh, you know untrusting and secretive,
mhm,
and not that I know that Maersk has been any of those things. I'm reading between the lines as an outsider.
right,
Uh, but yeah, I think that Walmart basically just wants to, make this stuff work, make this traceability thing work, keep people safe, reduce their liability, reduce their losses when something's found to be tainted. So you don't have to throw out every single head of romaine lettuce in the United States. You just throw out the ones that are bad, which you can't do if you can't track and trace. So, a big track and trace is a big win for everybody. It also brings about, by the way, um, monopoly issues, right? Issues of
right.
antitrust, anti-trade. Uh, all of the airlines can see each other's prices in real time. And so airlines tend to do a lot of price tweaking that might or might not be price fixing. Uh, and they are deregulated and they are subject to antitrust enforcement. So that to me is a good thing. What will happen with these food trust networks and other related chains? Gosh, I don't know yet. It's going to be really interesting. Anyway, let me transition to the from background discussion to the thing I'm on right now, which is this
Sure.
P2145 project. So P2145 or P2145 is it's a working group. It's authorized by the IEEE Standards Association, which has been creating standards for technologists for I think almost 100 years. Uh, they have an extremely well practiced and robust system for doing the work of standards creation. That's what the Standards Association does inside the IEEE. They've got a wonderful wealth of knowledge and experience in how to create a standard. And they've recently rolled out something called the Open Standard Initiative, where standards, rather than being purchased, as um, if you needed the written standard for manufacturing some electrical dongle and you needed it to conform to whichever the three standards are for that dongle, you would
Right.
have to buy the publication from the source to make sure it's the right one and it's up to date, and it pays them for their staff time and so forth. Uh, and if you don't want to use standards, then you don't have to buy the standard and you don't have to follow it, but then you're not going to be compliant and people may not buy your stuff. So there's obviously a sort of shared pool resource thing here where even my competitors and I all want to be standard compliant so that we all, when we plug things into outlets, they work, right? That the plug that I'm plugging in is the right size and shape and that it accepts the electricity that's in there. And so standards creation really is it's probably in its own way as important as the open source movement for similar reasons, because it's a rising tide that lifts all boats. And so that's why I turned to the IEEE for this, because I really wanted that support, that institutional knowledge, and that all the structure and process that they have. And the P2145 initiative is all about blockchain governance standards. And the very first thing we want to do is standardize the language and come up with a lexicon, if you will, a glossary, where we can, someone says trust node and somebody else says block producer and somebody else says validator. To what extent are those all the same thing, and to what extent are they different? And in what ways are they different, if they are? And what is the canonical word? We may or may not pick a canonical standard word. We may have to. And then once we've got a language, then we can look at something like a maturity model, like, what are the phases that blockchain governance seems to travel through as projects scale up, right? It's almost always going to go through an authoritarian phase because, I've spun up the first chain, it's got one node and I'm in charge of it and it's mine. I'm not going to invite 3 people in just so we can all vote on stuff pointlessly. I'm still trying to build my solution. I don't even know what I'm building yet. So of course there's an authoritarian phase, and there's probably a small tribal council phase. And at some point you might get into some sort of quasi-representative democracy phase. Who knows? And that sort of concept of a maturity model for governance is interesting to several of the members of the group.
Right.
And so far, we've attracted a terrific lineup. We've got folks from the Ethereum community. We got some Hyperledger folks in there, a couple of Ripple folks, I believe, Decred, EOS, and so on. So we've got a decently broad set of perspectives coming in to do this work. And our kickoff meeting is the 20th of March. And then we'll be meeting once a month moving forward. And that's not counting breakout groups that go in depth on specific topics. We've already got our first breakout group working on that vocabulary that I mentioned. So I think this has the potential to dramatically improve the quality of blockchain governance across the world, just by articulating and defining some of the questions that we all face, so that some folks don't even realize the questions are there. When they face the questions, go, I've never seen this before. And you try to search on it, you can't find any answers, or you find contradictory answers. So I think that this, and there's another project that I've been a part of that I'm very proud of called the Wharton Crypto Governance Workshop. Kevin Werbach is the organizer. And Professor Werbach invited me and 24 other people to San Francisco last July to spend 2 days on what is blockchain governance anyway, which was a great question. And I was very gratified that only a few of them knew very much more than me, and none of us knew more than the rest of us. So there was very much a pooling of partial knowledge to make a greater whole. It was lovely. And even more importantly, we then took that initial work and developed it over several weeks into a set of 20 questions that you can ask about any project, and in a very structured way, get a picture of what kind of governance they currently have. And there, if you go to the cryptogov.net, I believe is the URL, you'll see, I'm going to type that in, make sure I've got the URL correct. Cryptogov.net has a little background on the project. It has the questionnaires in there, the 20 questions, and it has some responses to those questions by project as they've come in, and that includes 2 that I've written. We've got Bitcoin, Corda, Dash, Decred, XRP, Zcash, EOS mainnet. It's a great start for students of this very important topic. So you had a question. I keep interrupting you. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. It's okay to go on a tangent. I do it all the time.
Yeah.
But it'd be really cool to take all those people that you got together to work on this stuff and that are involved, and do like a public discussion on it, every once in a while.
Absolutely.
And maybe go live or something, or put it on YouTube or whatever. I think a lot of people would find these conversations interesting, diving into them, especially if you can get people from EOS and from Ether and Ripple and Hyperledger and Corda and whatnot, all at a table, talking about this stuff. That's something you get very rarely in this space, especially with a lot of these projects.
Unless you're me. Because if you're me, you have those conversations every week, and it's awesome. But I agree. I think we need to be more and more public with it. I think that's what the questionnaire and the answers on cryptogov.net are going to help do. It's what podcasts like yours are going to help do. And it's what P2145 is going to help do, is start to make more and more public, more and more shared, the knowledge of what is blockchain governance, why is it important, how do you go about it, and how can you assess where you are. My own company, StrongBlock, is working on this. We've believed since our founding that blockchain governance is going to be tremendously important. We're going after the business market. And
Right.
we've had this pretty strong intuitive sense that, boy, this is going to be, our customers may or may not know it, but we know it, that they're going to need governance pretty soon. So we've been working on just simple governance support tools, like a way to publish a motion, hey, let's all do X, and publish that on chain, on your own chain, the one you made on StrongBlock, because we support people making private chains for development and for going to production in a private chain fashion to solve business problems. So you've got a little primitive already written to say, hey, I'm going to propose something, and we've got a way to register voters. And how you go about doing that internally needs to be in your written contract, because if it's a private chain, you need to onboard people through a legal process, not just say, hey, come here and make a login and you're part of the community. No. You need to know your people. Trust me, if you're building an important business project, you want to know who's on that chain. And you need to invite them in, and you need to have a way to kick them off. That goes back to Ostrom's rule that if you can't define your boundaries and who's in and who's out, you don't have a community.
Absolutely. In the community too, it's like the heart and soul of a lot of these different things. And, doing the podcast, it's great having this conversation too, because a lot of people will get to see it. A lot of young people, they're trying to get into the space, that want to get into coding and build on blockchain and create solutions and whatnot. Those are the people that'll have the biggest impact on governance going forward. And it's awesome to have these conversations, in private or on the side, but, making them as public as possible, having
Yes.
conversations like this or with other people.
Yes.
Because, the people that you're inspiring, the people that want to get into the space, you never know which one of them are really going to solve this issue or really push this issue, and come up
Yep.
with solutions. I think that's
Yeah.
probably the most important thing you can do.
Great point. I love it. One last point I'll make, because I know we're probably near the end of our time,
Sure.
but I want to mention that as you think about any way of constraining individual behavior within your collective, and by the way, if you aren't constraining individual behavior within your collective, you don't have a collective. Every rule constrains someone's behavior. If there are no rules, there is no collective. So, all of you ANCAP libertarian types like myself back not that long ago, it's like, hey, society is defined as a collection of individuals who each bends a little bit in order to fit in with the rest. And so there's traditionally, the thinking is that there are four major forces at work that could be used in some combination to constrain individual freedom in order to promote the collective's interests. And those four are legal, social, market, and code. Legal constraints obviously require some sort of legal system. I recommend binding arbitration and some sort of contract that people sign when they join. That way they do face personal legal liability if they break the rules. Social, you've got to have some kind of socialization of folks around these values. That's where legitimacy is going to come from. You can have all the legal stuff you want in the world, but if people in their hearts don't feel that it's fair, then you've lost their hearts and souls, and you've created problems for yourself. So you need to make sure that there is some sort of set of shared social values somehow, or at least hope that you can create that. So that's legal and social. The other two are market forces and code. Most chains are, especially public chains, are all about the market. Oh yeah, market forces, yay! And there is a role for the market in, if you've got some sort of many-to-many buyer and seller relationship, I wouldn't do anything but a market to let price clearing find the right price and let the price mechanism convey the information that it conveys. And not everything should go through a market, but some things should. And you can usually tell pretty quick if you've got the right stuff going through a market, and if you don't, things either work really well or they don't. And lastly is code, and that's where blockchains shine. Code is the hard physical environment. You know, you could say, why does a person not steal a bicycle? Well, the legal reason is they'd get arrested and face jail time or a fine or some sort of trouble. The social reason is they might lose reputation. People might frown on them. Their parents might be mad at them. Their neighbors might stop trusting them. They might face other social repercussions reputationally. The market reason is that maybe that stolen bikes don't sell for very much. And then lastly, there's the code, which translated in the physical world as physical things. Maybe that bike is locked up. Oh, oops, I guess I can't steal it. And that's, again, one of the things that blockchains have such a wonderful advantage on is this ability to use code to secure things, to use code to prove that someone said something, to use code to prevent theft, to maintain privacy, to segregate things, and so forth. So that's, as you go through your mental checklist of allocating, how shall we solve X? You might make 4 columns and say, okay, the problem is allocating founder tokens, and then there's a disagreement on who is a founder. Okay, and then you just start filling in the 4 columns. Like, is there a legal thing? Is there a social thing? Is there a market thing? And is there a code thing to help me with this? And what will play well with the community? Because if you use a code mechanism that people feel is illegitimate socially, you will actually hurt the chain. Unless you've got, of course, a buy-in that says, hey, this code over here, it follows certain rules and here they are, and we're all buying into it when we join. I cannot stress enough the importance of people buying in emotionally to the social compact of here's our collective and here's why we're all here and here's what we're doing together. When people don't do that, they're tourists. They're there to transact. They're not really community members. They're there to put their coin in the vending machine and get their thing and leave. And folks like that, bless them. I don't think they should have much of a voice in governance. I think their needs should be considered because otherwise they don't come. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't necessarily give them a vote in at least certain classes of things.
Yeah, I mean, that's always tough. But I mean, I think more importantly, it's the creative aspect of it, having new ideas come into governance, because there's always going to be some kind of issue. And whether it's starting with the DAO and what happened there, or at the point we're at now where we're debating on what form of governance is best, how to go about it, and even getting people together with P2145 and discussing this stuff. But I mean, the idea is the creative aspect to it. I think that needs to be emphasized as well, like getting more people
There's
involved.
so much scope. There's so much scope for creativity here. There's so much scope for innovation and novel thinking. And of course, and this is, again, what gets people excited about blockchain, is if you can make it work in blockchain, you could then port that back into broader society. And hey, I've got this new clever way of doing whatever it is, and it solves this problem for groups of people. And hey, look, we can apply it over here in this, say, refugee camp, or over here in this impoverished community, or anywhere. Right. And things that can make the human condition better for all of us. And I mean, if we're not using blockchain to make things better for each other and ourselves and the world at large, that really is what we should and could be doing. And I think that's what most projects are doing, or trying to.
Yeah, they definitely are. It can even be something that's not even blockchain too. You could take an approach like IOTA or Hashgraph. You can take blockchain, just create some different kind of hybrid. There's always different kinds.
We're talking about it's distributed ledgers, it's distributed communities, it's if you any kind of distributed ledger like thing, we've recreated the starting condition I mentioned, which is you've got a group of actors who share an interest. They share some problem space. They want to have a shared solution, and they need to steer it over time through an unknown future. How shall they do that? And the only answer is governance.
Absolutely. That's actually probably a good place for us to wrap up the podcast as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I would add that humans are social creatures, right? I mean, I'm as much of an individualist as anybody, but you look at every animal on the planet, they're all evolved for their environment. Like fish are evolved for water, birds are evolved to fly, except for penguins who are evolved to swim. But they too are, they're evolved for their environment, and humans are evolved for the most important aspect of our environment, which is other people. we are intensely social creatures. If we were, as an individual, we would die in the wilderness, most of us. But
Hmm.
as team creating, team players, we've dominated the planet for better or for worse. And if we want to do it for better, we need to come together and be an even better team. So this is the blockchain struggle around governance is the human struggle.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how can people keep up with P2145, what you guys are doing? Website, social media? What do you guys
Yeah, we've
have?
just started getting our website set up. IEEE has given us a shared uh, set of web pages on their big server so that we can control. So I'm going to set up an information page, and
Hmm.
I'll get that link to you. And of course, we hold meetings to which the public is welcome. You do have to register and agree to the IEEE privacy agreement, but that's the only constraint that I'm aware of. And literally anyone can participate. And in fact, by rule, I'm required to allow everyone to participate who wants to. And I have every intention of honoring that. So I'll make sure that you get that link for that website, and that anybody who comes to it and expresses an interest in participating, whether just to read the progress or to offer input, we want to hear from you.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'll put a bunch of info in the description for the episode as well before it goes out. But Thomas, thank you for taking the time to come on and everything and talk about blockchain governance. It's fantastic conversation, very interesting. I'll try and get Kirsten on a separate episode to talk about some other stuff as well, kind of
Well, I'll tell
diversify it a
you,
little bit.
yeah, she is an amazing human being, absolutely invaluable in the P2145 project. And her specialty is uh, coalitions. And so you can see the overlap between, blockchain or
Oh, yeah.
distributed ledger or whatever and coalition creation. If you've got a project or you're even thinking of a project, if I were in their shoes, I'd be talking to Kirsten.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll definitely be following up with her to do an episode. It'd be a great follow-up episode to what we talked about today and everything. It ties in very
Wonderful.
well.
Super. Love, I love being on, Brandon. Thank you for asking some great questions and for your interest in this important topic.
Yeah, of course. You're very welcome. Anytime. Thomas, thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.